I opened the door after a long day at work and found six of my husband's relatives sitting comfortably in the living room waiting for dinner. I smiled politely, walked to the bedroom, and quietly closed the door behind me. I had no plans to cook anything. I had already eaten on my way home. The silence after that door clicked shut was not the peace Sarah had desperately craved. It was the sound of a detonation, not a violent, explosive bang, but the implosion of years of unspoken expectations, of sacrificed evenings, of quiet resentment festering in the humid air of a southern summer. This wasn't merely a closed door, it was the seal on a tomb, the definitive end of an era, though neither Sarah nor Ethan, her bewildered husband, knew it then. What started as a small, deliberate act of defiance would unravel a tapestry woven with threads of convenience, manipulation, and a profound, almost criminal misunderstanding of another person's soul. We're not talking about a trivial domestic squabble here. We're peering into the slow, agonizing death of a partnership, illuminated by the stark, unforgiving light of a refrigerator's hum and the distant, expectant murmur of uninvited guests. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we dissect the silent declaration that evening, we need to understand the architecture of the unspoken agreement that led Sarah to that precise moment, standing in her hallway, keys still clutched in her hand, the faint scent of stale pot roast from the neighbor's unit mingling with the industrial disinfectant from her own long day. Sarah, before this particular Tuesday evening, was a woman who navigated her life with the precision of a seasoned engineer. Her chosen profession, ironically enough, she believed in systems in order in predictable outcomes. She believed in systems in order in predictable outcomes. Ethan, on the other hand, operated more like a force of nature, or perhaps a particularly charming tumbleweed. Their initial attraction, as these things often are, was a classic study in opposites. Iruya, the assignee opposites. She provided the structure, he supplied the spontaneity, or so she told herself in the early days. He was the life of the party, she was the steady anchor. But anchors, even the strongest ones, can be dragged. I've analyzed countless cases where this dynamic, initially seen as complementary, curdles into a toxic dependency. One partner, often the more organized or empathetic, becomes the designated problem solver or emotional caretaker, while the other luxuriates in the freedom from responsibility. This creates what psychologists term a narcissistic supply dynamic, where Sarah's endless well of accommodation fed Ethan's insatiable need for convenience and validation. Every time she cooked an extra meal, cleaned up his mess, or swallowed her frustration for the sake of peace, she reinforced the expectation. And the expectation, dear audience, was about to become an army of six. That Tuesday, the light was already fading, painting the brick facade of their small suburban home in a weary orange hue. Sarah's shoulders ached from hours bent over schematics, her mind buzzing with the complexities of a new bridge design. All she wanted was the familiar quiet of her home, a warm shower, and perhaps a reheated meal she'd meal prepped on Sunday. The scent that usually greeted her, a faint whisper of her own perfume, the lingering aroma of coffee, was instead replaced by something thicker, richer, unmistakably savory. Meat. And then the faint overlapping hum of multiple voices rising and falling in an unfamiliar cadence. She pushed open the door, the old brass knob cool under her fingers, and stepped into the vestibule. The living room, typically a sanctuary of neutral tones and carefully arranged books, had been entirely transformed. There, sprawled across the sofa, the armchair, and even perched on an ottoman she usually reserved for quiet reading, were six people, six unfamiliar people beyond a vague familial resemblance. Aunt Carol, a woman whose laugh could shatter glass, was holding court from the armchair, a half-empty glass of iced tea sweating on the polished mahogany end table. Uncle Frank, with his perpetually raised eyebrow and suspenders, was reclined on the sofa, a newspaper open on the sofa, a newspaper open on his lap. Occasionally interjecting a gruff comment, their cousins, Michelle and Kevin, were engrossed in their phones, oblivious, occasionally snickering at something unseen. And in the very center, on the love seat, sat Grandma Rose, her gnarled hands clasped over a floral purse, her gaze, sharp as a hawk's, fixed directly on Sarah. Beside her, Grandpa George, snoring softly, a faint trail of drool tracing a path from his lip. The air was thick, not just with the scent of an impending meal, but with an almost palpable sense of presence. They were not guests who had just arrived. They were settlers. They had made themselves at home, and then, in a flash of recognition that sent a cold jolt down Sarah's spine, she saw Ethan. He was leaning against the kitchen doorway, a casual smile on his face, a bottle of beer in his hand, looking utterly relaxed, as if this tableau was the most natural thing in the world. He offered a small, almost imperceptible shrug, a gesture that conveyed, surprise, look who's here, but also, don't make a fuss. 1,000 conversations, 1,000 conversations, 1,000 suppressed grievances flashed through Sarah's mind the time Ethan forgot to tell her his college roommate was staying for a week, the weekend she had planned scuttled because his mother decided to drop in, the vacation fund that mysteriously dwindled after a family emergency loan to his sister. The unspoken contract that her time, her home, her energy were communal resources readily available for his extended family's convenience without so much as a precursory text. But instead of screaming or collapsing or even sighing dramatically, Sarah did something else entirely. Her features, which moments before had tightened with the shock of invasion, smoothed into a mask of polite composure. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, the kind you offer a distant acquaintance you dimly recall from a forgotten social event. She met Grandma Rose's piercing stare, gave a slight nod to Aunt Carol's booming monologue, and offered a quick practiced good evening everyone. Then, with the quiet dignity of a queen retreating from an ill-advised skirmish, she turned. Her work bag still heavy with her laptop and files, felt like a lead weight, yet she carried it without falter. She walked directly to the bedroom, the carpet muffling her footsteps. The hum of the refrigerator, usually a background drone, seemed to amplify, a low thrumming witness to the scene. The subtle scent of old wood polish and the faint sweet trace of lavender from a sachet she kept in her drawer filled her nostrils as she crossed the threshold. And then, with a soft, decisive click, the door closed behind her. The sound was so minimal, so utterly unassuming, that it barely registered over Aunt Carol's latest anecdote, yet it resonated like a thunderclap in the silent chambers of Sarah's own heart. She leaned back against the cool wood, the silence of her private space a stark contra. To the convivial chaos just meters away. She had eaten a quick, unsatisfying burrito. In her car on the way home, an act of self-preservation she hadn't consciously registered as preparation for this precise moment. Now it was her armor. The quiet didn't last long. It rarely did in their house, a few minutes, perhaps 5, where the sounds of Ethan's family faded into a muffled, indistinct buzz. Then a sharp rap on the door, not a tentative knock, but a proprietary one. Sarah didn't move from where she stood, still leaning against the door, eyes closed. Another rap, louder. Sarah? You in there? Ethan's voice laced with an edge she knew well. The let's not make a scene edge. She pushed off the door, walked to the dresser, and began calmly taking off her watch, then her earrings. The door opened, a crack at first, then fully. Ethan stood there, hands on his hips, his smile gone, replaced by a frown of carefully calibrated annoyance. He was wearing his disappointed husband face, a look Sarah had come to resent more than outright anger. What's going on? He asked, his voice low, a dangerous undertone. My family's here. They're hungry. Sarah turned. Met his gaze calmly. Oh, are they? Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Don't play coy. Sarah, you know they're here. They've been here since 4. I told you I invited them for dinner. Did you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Did you? You? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Because my calendar, my phone, and my memory seemed to be remarkably blank. On that particular detail, Ethan, I texted you while you were at work. I sent a group text. He fumbled for his phone, scrolling rapidly. The infamous group text, Sarah mused, turning to pick up a clean pair of pajamas. The digital equivalent of shouting into the void and hoping someone hears you over the roar of a jet engine. She held up her phone, screen unlocked, displaying a series of work-related emails. My phone was on silent, for work, as it often is, and even if it wasn't, Ethan, a group text for 6 people coming for dinner at my house after I've worked a 12-hour shift. It's just dinner, Sarah, my family. What's the big deal? They flew in from out of state. Grandma Rose hasn't seen us in months. It's a surprise. His voice began to climb, tinged with a righteous indignation that to Sarah felt like gaslighting in slow motion. Don't make me out to be the bad guy, Sarah, when you're the one causing the scene. A surprise for whom? Certainly not for me. Did you even consider that I might have plans? Or that I might be tired? Or that I might not appreciate 6 unannounced guests being dropped on my doorstep, expecting me to magically produce a feast? She finally let a sliver of her anger show, a tremor in her voice. They're family, Sarah. They don't need an invitation. They just come over. That's what family does. And I told them you're such a great cook. Grandma Rose was really looking forward to your lasagna. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting towards the door, clearly worried his family might overhear. Can you just get dressed and come out? We'll order something if you don't want to cook. We'll order something if you don't want to cook. Just please don't make this a thing. The implicit threat in his voice was clear. My reputation is on the line, and you're ruining it. Order something, Sarah scoffed. Pulling on her pajama pants, you invited 6 people, Ethan, 6. And you expected me to cook for them after my day. And now you're offering to order something as if that's some grand concession, some magnificent compromise for your surprise guests. I already ate, Ethan. I ate on the way home. This seemed to genuinely shock him, his brow furrowed. You ate. Why would you eat? You knew they were coming. No, Ethan, you knew they were coming. I die. Didn't. And I ate because I was hungry and I wanted to get home and relax. Imagine that. A novel concept, I know. She walked to the bathroom, deliberately leaving the door open to crack. Tell them to make themselves comfortable. Perhaps they'd like to order a dozen pizzas. Or maybe you can cook for once. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the distant clatter of what sounded like Aunt Carol rearranging the coasters. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his jaw working. The shock of her defiance, the absolute refusal to play her assigned role, was clearly a blow. This was not the Sarah he knew, the one who would sigh grumble, but ultimately acquiesce, driven by a deep-seated desire to avoid conflict and maintain the illusion of domestic harmony. This was the moment the sunk cost fallacy truly hit her. A realization that all her previous investments in being the good wife had yielded no return, only deeper exploitation. Sarah, this is ridiculous. He finally managed, his voice barely a whisper, though it vibrated with a frustrated intensity. You're making me look bad in front of my family. She emerged from the bathroom, toothbrush in hand. And you, Ethan, are making me feel bad, worse than bad. You're making me feel bad. Worse than bad. You're making me feel invisible. And I'm done with that. She brushed her teeth with slow, deliberate strokes, watching his reflection in the mirror, watching him shrink, the entitlement draining from his face, replaced by genuine confusion. He was witnessing the collapse of his narcissistic supply in real time, and he didn't know how to react. He finally turned, a defeated slump to his shoulders. Fine, he mumbled, fine. I'll figure something out. He backed out of the room, leaving the door ajar. Sarah waited until she heard the faint murmur of his voice again, addressing his family, likely weaving some excuse for her absence. She tea. Hen closed her bedroom door once more, this time with a distinct, satisfying click that echoed not in her heart, but in the suddenly quieted, expectant house. That click, that singular, defiant, almost silent click. It's easy to dismiss it as a small act, a petty rebellion. But for Sarah, it was the snapping of a very old, very frayed rope. It was the moment she stopped rowing against the current and let herself drift, not aimlessly, but towards a new shore. The physical sensation of her own betrayal, the slow-burning resentment that had been her constant companion, suddenly felt like a heavy cloak she could finally shrug off. It was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. The pacing of her life, previously dictated by Ethan's whimsical demands and his family's casual intrusions, was now hers to command, even if only within the four walls of her bedroom. The next morning, the silence in the house was arctic. Ethan's relatives had departed, probably with bellies full of hastily ordered takeout and minds full of speculative gossip about poor Sarah's mysterious absence. Ethan himself was gone, leaving for work before her, a rare occurrence. He'd left a note tacked to the refrigerator with a cheap magnet. We need to talk. This was out of line. The passive aggression was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She was out of line, not his unannounced guest, not his complete disregard for her time or feelings. Just Sarah, but this time Sarah didn't crumple. She didn't internalize the blame. Instead, a new cold clarity settled over her. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern of expectation without contribution, of demand without respect. She picked up the note, read it again, and then crumpled it into a tight ball and dropped it into a tight ball and dropped it into the recycling bin. That, she decided, was exactly what she needed to do with their marriage, recycle it in. To something new, something better, or more likely discard it entirely. This is where the story shifts from a domestic drama to something more akin to a forensic investigation. Sarah wasn't just emotionally betrayed. She suspected, with a growing dread, that she was also being financially undermined. Ethan had always handled the money stuff, assuring her he had a better head for it. She made good money, but it seemed to evaporate. Savings accounts never seemed to grow. There were always excuses, markets down, unexpected expense, just a temporary glitch. The seeds of doubt, once mere specks, now bloomed into a full-blown conspiracy theory in her mind. This is where Chloe comes in. Chloe was Sarah's oldest friend, a software engineer by trade, with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit. She was the kind of person who could debug a complex algorithm while simultaneously deciphering the nuances of a passive-aggressive email. Sarah called her that afternoon, not quite knowing what she would say, but needing to articulate the suffocating weight of her realization. They met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind with exposed brick and a faint aroma of burnt sugar. The clatter of ceramic cups and the hushed conversations of students offered a strange, comforting backdrop. Sarah recounted the dinner incident, the years of subtle neglect, the feeling of being consistently sidelined in her own home. Chloe listened, her eyes narrowed, occasionally taking a sip of her lukewarm latte. Okay, Chloe said finally, setting her cup down with a decisive click. So the uninvited relatives, the expectation of free labor, the blatant disregard for your schedule, it all points to a classic case of what I call spousal entitlement syndrome. But the money part, that's where it gets interesting, Sarah, because emotional abuse often goes hand in hand with financial control. He manages the money you make it disappears. Sound familiar? Sarah nodded slowly, tracing the rim of her own mug. He always had an answer: a new car repair, a sudden family medical bill for one of his cousins, a great investment opportunity that never quite paid off. I always just trusted him. He's my husband. And that, my dear, Chloe leaned forward, her voice low, is exactly what he counted on, that trust. It's the ultimate currency in these relationships. But trust, once broken, can be a potent weapon. What do you have access to? Bank statements, joint accounts, investment portfolios, everything. Technically, Sarah said, but he handles all the logins. He set them up. I just assumed they were the same ones we'd always use. Assumption, Chloe sighed. The mother of all forensic headaches. All right. First step, let's start with the basics. Do you have access to your credit score, annual credit report, any online portals where your salary lands? Over the next few weeks, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an increasing sense of grim determination, Sarah and Chloe began their meticulous forensic dive. Sarah provided the fragments of information she could recall: the name of their bank, a couple of old account numbers, Ethan's email address, which thankfully he used for everything, even his spam subscriptions. Chloe, with her particular blend of technical prowess and stubborn ingenuity, started piecing together the digital breadcrumbs. They sat side by side at Chloe's apartment, surrounded by monitors glowing with spreadsheets and browser tabs. The air was often thick with the faint scent of ozone from the electronics and the nervous energy humming between them. Okay, here's our primary joint checking, Chloe murmured, scrolling through years of transactions. Looks normal enough. Regular deposits from your paychecks. Is bills paid, nothing too suspicious. Except she zoomed in on a section. Look at these frequent, smaller transfers to an account labeled Ethan's emergency fund, which to my knowledge you don't have a separate one for, do you? Sarah frowned. No, we always just had the one shared savings. Chloe typed furiously. Aha, this emergency fund account isn't even with your primary bank. It's with a smaller, online-only institution. And guess what? It's solely in his name, and the transfers aren't small. We're talking hundreds, sometimes 1,000, every single month. For the last 2 years, that's a significant chunk of change, Sarah. Tens of thousands. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Tens of thousands for what? He never mentioned it. Exactly, Chloe said, her voice grim. And it gets better. Remember that great investment opportunity he mentioned last year, the one that never paid off? Turns out it did pay off for him. He transferred a substantial sum from this emergency fund into a relatively obscure high-yield crypto platform, and then 6 months later transferred a much larger sum back into it. Then a week after that, a huge chunk of it vanished into another account, a brokerage account also solely in his name with a different firm entirely. The screen glowed with numbers, a chilling testament to Ethan's methodical deception. Chloe, like a digital bloodhound, followed the scent. She tracked IP addresses from login attempts, cross-referenced dates with Ethan's travel history, gleaned from old social media posts and credit card statements he thought were private, and even delved into metadata from old emails Sarah found in a forgotten drafts folder, drafts Ethan had written but never sent, discussing financial plans with an unknown third party. This is textbook financial plans with an unknown third party. This is textbook financial infidelity, Sarah, Chloe explained. Her finger, Aegis transaction. He's systematically siphoning off funds, hiding assets, and creating a separate financial life. And the timing, look here, right around the time you were discussing that renovation project you wanted to do, the one he kept putting off due to lack of funds, the weight of the legal documents they were accumulating, printed bank statements, archived emails, account opening forms grew heavier with each passing day. Sarah could practically feel the weight of the betrayal, a physical ache in her chest. The hum of Chloe's laptop, once a neutral background noise, now sounded like a tireless mechanical witness, exposing the truth. The flicker of the fluorescent light above Chloe's desk seemed to pulse with revelation, casting long, accusing shadows. And this, Chloe said, pointing to a series of outgoing transactions from the secret brokerage account, these are consistent payments to an address in another state, an apartment building, and correlating with those payments are regular deposits into a local checking account, an account held by someone named Jessica Miller. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Sarah felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Jessica Miller, she whispered, the name tasting like ash. Looks like it, Chloe confirmed, her expression softening with genuine sympathy. And cross-referencing public records, Jessica Miller, a paralegal, recently moved to that address, and her social media, which I know you've been off of for years, well, let's just say she and Ethan have been very active online together for the past year and a half. Photos, comments, very cozy. The financial betrayal, it turned out, was merely the tip of a much larger, uglier iceberg. The forensic deep dive had unearthed not just hidden accounts and suspicious transfers, but a hidden life. The true cost of Ethan's perceived convenience, perceived convenience was staggering both monetarily and emotionally. Sarah was not just a meal ticket, she was a blindfold. The human capacity for denial is immense. For years, Sarah had explained away the inconsistencies, rationalized the financial tight spots, believed the excuses, and this is the insidious nature of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. It erodes your self-trust, makes you question your own sanity. Ethan didn't need to explicitly lie about everything. He simply needed to manage Sarah's perception, to create a reality where his actions were always justified and her doubts were always irrational. But with Chloe's methodical presentation of irrefutable evidence, the cold, hard data, the metadata that painted a picture far more damning than any verbal confession, Sarah's perception shattered. It wasn't a sudden break, but a slow, agonizing splintering. Each document, each transaction, each photo of Jessica Miller with her husband was a shard. The physical sensation of this betrayal was not a sharp, sudden stab, but a dull, pervasive ache, as if her entire skeletal structure was realigning itself under a new, heavier gravitational pull. The pacing of their investigation, initially cautious and almost theoretical, had accelerated into a frantic race against the clock, against the mounting evidence, against the rapidly dwindling remnants of Sarah's illusions. Armed with a stack of meticulously organized printouts, bank statements, social media screenshots, apartment lease agreements for Ms. Miller, Sarah found herself in the sterile, air-conditioned office of Mr. Harrison, a divorce attorney Chloe had highly recommended. The fluorescent lights hummed a low, almost mournful tune above them, reflecting off the polished conference table. The weighty legal documents bound neatly felt cool and dense beneath Sarah's trembling fingers. Mr. Harrison, a man with kind eye, but a razor-sharp legal mind, listened patiently as Sarah recounted her story, interspersing it with Chloe's findings. He reviewed the documents with a practiced eye, occasionally nodding, making notes in a precise, almost surgical hand. "Miss Turner," he said, finally leaning back in his chair, a grave expression on his face, "what you and your friend have uncovered here is substantial. This isn't just about a husband inviting relatives over for dinner without consulting you. This is a clear pattern of financial deception, asset concealment, and frankly, marital infidelity. This documentation provides a very strong foundation for an equitable divorce settlement, and potentially, if we pursue it aggressively, a case for spousal support and a greater share of the marital assets you helped acquire." Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. The words divorce settlement hung in the air, heavy and final. "So, what happens now?" "Now," Mr. Harrison said, picking up a pen, "we assemble our case. We secure these accounts, we issue subpoenas, and we serve Ethan with papers. He will likely be shocked. He will likely deny everything. He will try to gaslight you one last time to convince you that you're the one overreacting, that you're the one destroying everything. But remember this, Miss Turner, we have the evidence. The numbers don't lie." And his surprised dinner guests, they were just the final straw. A symptom, not the disease. The fight, Sarah realized, was just beginning. But for the first time in years, she wasn't fighting alone. And for the first time, she had tangible weapons beyond her quiet resentment. The confrontation, when it finally came, wasn't the dramatic showdown Sarah had once fantasized about. There were no hurled accusations across a dinner table, no tearful confessions. It was, instead, a stark clinical unveiling. The legal papers arrived at their home on a Wednesday afternoon, hand-delivered by a process server while Ethan was still at work. Sarah had ensured she was home not to gloat, but to witness the crumbling of his carefully constructed facade. He called her from work, his voice a tight, barely suppressed scream. "What the hell is this, Sarah? What did you send me?" Sarah, seated calmly in her living room, the space where his relatives had once sat so comfortably, took a deep breath. "They're called divorce papers, Ethan, and accompanying them are bank statements, investment reports, and a rather extensive file on Jessica Miller. Perhaps you're familiar with her." A stunned silence. Then a sputtering, half-formed denial. "Jessica, what are you talking about? And divorce? This is insane, Sarah. Are you out of your mind? You're ruining everything." "Ruining everything? Ruining everything," Sarah repeated, a cold, brittle laugh escaping her lips. "No, Ethan, you ruined everything. You ruined my trust. You ruined our finances. You ruined our finances. You ruined any shred of respect I ever had for you. What I'm doing now is salvaging what's left of my life, and I have the receipts. Quite literally, this is ridiculous." He raged, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and panic. "You think you can just pull this? I'll fight you every step of the way. You won't get a dime. You'll be left with nothing, Sarah. Nothing." The classic bully tactic turning to threats when cornered. Reactive abuse, the shift from subtle manipulation to outright hostility, was now on full display. "Oh, I think I will, Ethan," Sarah countered, her voice steady, surprisingly devoid of any tremor. "Because I've spent the last few weeks working with an excellent attorney and an even more excellent forensic accountant. My friend Chloe, you remember her, don't you? The one you always dismissed as too intense. She's very good at uncovering hidden accounts," says. "Hell corporations and tracing funds." It turns out that emergency fund was quite the bustling little hub of activity, wasn't it? And those transfers to Jessica's apartment, very telling. Another long silence. This one was different. It wasn't just surprise or anger, it was fear. The fear of exposure, of consequences, of his carefully orchestrated parallel life collapsing. Sarah, please. His voice was suddenly softer, almost pleading, a transparent attempt to revert to charm, to regain control. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. It was just a mistake. A momentary lapse. My family was just here for a visit. It wasn't meant to be a big deal. You just overreacted, like you always do. We can go to therapy. We can work it out. Therapy? Sarah scoffed. You want to work it out now, after years of gaslighting, after secretly draining our savings, after setting up a separate life with another woman? No, Ethan, there's nothing to work out. The us you thought you had, the one that revolved entirely around your convenience and your desires, is gone. It died the night I closed that bedroom door and realized I was done being invisible. She heard him suck in a sharp breath, the implication of that quiet, defiant act finally sinking in. You knew, didn't you? He whispered, not a question, but a dawning realization. You knew what you were doing that night. I did, Sarah affirmed, looking out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in fiery hues, a stark contrast to the cold, dead landscape of their marriage. I finally did. The divorce was, as Mr. Harrison predicted, contentious. Ethan fought tooth and nail, attempting every trick in the book, from emotional blackmail to veiled threats, but the forensic evidence painstakingly gathered by Chloe was irrefutable. Sarah walked away with a significant portion of the marital assets, a fair share of Ethan's hidden gains, and a new understanding of her own resilience. She also walked away with something intangible yet infinitely valuable: her agency. Yet, as I reflect on Sarah's journey, I'm left with a pervasive sense of the cost of winning. She emerged victorious, yes, but not unscathed. The years of emotional toll, the erosion of trust, the profound sense of betrayal, these are not scars that fade quickly. The process of uncovering the truth, while empowering, was also deeply painful, forcing her to confront not just Ethan's deception, but her own complicity in allowing herself to be minimized for so long. She won the battle, but at what cost to her faith in relationships, in shared futures, and the simple, honest promise of a dinner invitation? So I leave you with this question, dear audience, as the final credits roll on this particular case study. In the face of such profound systemic disregard, was Sarah's quiet rebellion, culminating in a forensic dismantling of her marriage, an act of justifiable self-preservation, or did the brutal efficiency of her counterattack irrevocably change the very person she was fighting to reclaim? Was the cold hard logic of numbers and legal precedents a victory, or just a different kind of silence? Let's debate the ethics in the comments below.